I'm Conrad Wetzel, and sitting down with us today is Ricardo Diaz, who has a lot of interesting things to tell us, not only about himself, but about various things that he's involved in. Happy to have you with us here today, Ricardo.
Thank you, Conrad.
First of all, give us a little bit of background about yourself. Where were you born? Tell us something about
We'll condense 50 years into something
Yes.
that's amenable. I was born in Mexico, in Chihuahua, the city of Chihuahua. Actually not there, but that's where I grew up. And then we eventually moved back to the States for my mother, but it was our first time. I was 11, 12. I was in New Mexico and learning English, and then we moved in different places in New Mexico until it was time to go to college. And then I had the choice of Boston or Provo, Utah.
Mm-hmm.
It was a very hard decision
Yes.
for a high schooler.
Yes.
But I eventually went to Utah. And then from there, I got back east eventually to the University of Pennsylvania in Philadelphia. And then from there, 15 years there. And then the call was made to here. There was jobs in the Midwest, and so we ended up in this little place called Urbana.
Yes. And what job called you here?
Well, actually, the first one was for my wife. My wife works for Extension in the 4-H program. At the time, we knew very little about Extension, but we knew that the research universities in Philadelphia, it's a whole different ballgame, and we wanted a change, and so she came here, and then I eventually worked for Extension too in the Office of Hispanic Outreach, and that was my first entrance into what made up, actually the state, because we both worked at the state level for Extension, so we got to visit a lot of the towns, got to know a lot of the populations, the needs from, the traditional Extension services to the agriculture communities, to the cities, because at least in the youth programs, but also in economic development, the Extension does a lot of work in cities. And
one of the programs
also
is
includes
4-H,
here.
is it not?
Yes.
Yes.
So my wife works in the 4-H programs
Yes.
across the state for with youth and technology.
Many, many young people benefit by the extension programs.
Very much.
All kinds of projects. It's a great learning experience.
The more I understand it, it's more like the Google before Google.
Yeah.
Whenever you had a question, you would call your extension agent. Whenever the youth had something, it was through extension to the 4-H.
I was in 4-H as a young person. I made sure our boys had an
There
experience
you
with
go.
4-H.
And we're making sure that our girl has,
Yes.
our kids have 4-H.
That's a very good learning program.
Yeah.
Now, what brought you here to Urbana?
Well, the job situation, and I was thinking of this. I actually loved Philadelphia as a city and as its offering. But by the end, while weary of the university, we're at the University of Pennsylvania, which is huge. I could not leave the immigration part. That was the hardest part. I knew every level of what affects immigrants in Philadelphia. I had been in the commissions for it, had worked on the street with immigrants, and at the time I was also trying to hand off a soccer league with immigrants. And so I had the full gamut. And so here in Urbana, I was yearning, hungry for that. So besides the job, I wanted to be involved in everything with anyone who was working with immigrants.
Is there much work with immigrants here in Champaign-Urbana?
Lots.
Okay.
Lots. We can go from, the service area, the refugee center, does an excellent job of serving the daily needs. They started out as a refugee center, I think 25 years ago on how, she always quotes it, and I forget the actual number, but they've been around for a long time, in settling immigrants, refugees, but in the recent years, less refugees, more immigrants of all types, Latin Americans and Asians, probably being the biggest influx. And they're the center for many of these services. But the service offering is also very spread out, I would say. There is not a place where immigrants live, for example.
Mm-hmm.
And so whoever services immigrants is also scattered. So the county health does a great job. Avicenna Health Clinic,
Mm-hmm.
the Nelson. And so you might say that's spread into 3. In fact, Avicenna is having today's their last day to sign up for the 5K run.
What is
Well, Avicenna is a health clinic sponsored by really the mosque.
Mm-hmm.
And who are their clients? Well, the other immigrants, because there's less of Middle Eastern countries immigrants, but we have a lot of Latinos and we have a lot of Asians. So it's the interesting thing that, the mosque is sponsoring then health service for immigrants from Latin America and from Asia.
They started it to serve, of course, their own people, but because of others coming, they had to branch out.
They're excellent. I have to say that
Yes.
I love their work. But the Nelson Clinic is also good. So there's people on campus serving immigrants, in different ways. The school districts, the dual language programs, and all that. So I get a chance. This week is my summary week in a sense, because as I've prepared for the visitors that that we'll talk about later, it has brought me back to the many places in which immigrants are served and integrated here in the area.
Well, certainly an immigrant family faces job situations,
Yeah.
living, their children,
Mm-hmm.
education for their children, services, health services and so on. Say something about the needs of immigrant children.
Well, children are children. There's no, they have needs, and their primary source is their parents, and their
Yes.
parents fulfill as many needs as possible, and the best way that they can. We all do that. So from education to health to interaction to food, all that, their primary provider, of course, is their parents. But as we all know, it's the position and the resources that the parents have, and they'll give everything to their children. But if the parents don't have a resource, then they can't provide it, or if they don't know it. So, for example, in health, who knew, for example, that there is a dental clinic in which immigrants can go to if they don't have health insurance, if they can't get health insurance? Well, there is now in our area a dental clinic.
Very good.
And their educational needs. I was just visiting the early childhood center, both the Champaign one and the Urbana one, and I didn't realize this, but one of the principals, I think it was Chris in Urbana, or maybe Amy, she was telling us that they welcome children into the early childhood centers based on risk factors. Education of parents, single parenthood, income, and all that. And she says, but one of them, a big flag for them is if the parent is non-English speaking.
Oh, yes.
And so she said that places them in a higher situation also, because then the children don't have access to the rest of the system. Because if the parents don't speak English, the parents don't have access to the resources, and the kids therefore don't. And so
someone has to be an advocate for them.
An advocate, and they have parent liaisons for it. So,
yes. What are some of the actual challenges that teachers face when they have immigrant children in their classes?
Yeah. So at the early childhood, one of them has 13 languages being taught, and another one 15. So you can imagine then at the school, every teacher might not have all of them,
yes.
But the moment you have one, you might as well have all the others, because it's handled in a similar way. So there's Urbana has both school systems have served non-English speaking populations through English classes, and Maria in the Champaign district, and then Lupe on our side in Urbana have that. But they do quite a bit. They have now we have a dual language program in which Spanish and English are both taught since the beginning, and there's kids from both monolingual situations in the same classroom. To be, by the time I think it's 4th or 5th grade, 50-50. But for the teachers, so the non-English speaker can be either placed in a regular class or in an English learning class or in the dual language situation. And so different strategies for those different teachers. Because Urbana has the foresight, I would say, the sense to have the dual language program, then you can bring in the capacity within the teachers and the context too. So I really like that.
Yes, that's very important because the child's education lays the foundation for their life.
Yes. Yes. And so, for example, the school board discussion on this was very open, frank, and enlightened in that they recognize that academic skills in any language transfer to a second language.
Yes.
So they invest a lot of time in using the first language of the kids, teach them the academic skills, and as they're learning English, they transfer their reading skills to the English too, because the decoding of it is related, even if the language is different. So, yeah, we're actually in good shape, I think, as far as that, and we're constantly learning.
Yes. Now, Champaign-Urbana here is in East Central Illinois, is surrounded by communities that are mainly rural.
Yes.
And they don't face basically the same kind of challenges usually, do they? Is that right?
Well, one of the places where I'll be taking our Russian guests is Arcola.
Oh.
Arcola has a large immigrant influx to the point that in their base in the elementary school, but certainly in early childhood, over 60% of the kids are actually Spanish speaking.
Is that right?
So you might say they don't face them in the same way, but they face two. It just depends on the town. So in Arcola, it's particularly interesting because now they have a lot of experience and they're very well at the integration. They've done well in the integration mode and they've geared up for it. So they have youth, several youth in Parkland now because the immigrants there have been in constant influx for the last 20 years. And so...
So Parkland also provides a good services for immigrants as far as education
Parkland
opportunities.
does. They're excellent. Parkland does everything from, from the welcoming part, Latino night. Every year they have one for Spanish speakers, but they have English classes for adults. They have a GED program for English and Spanish. They also have this mentoring program that they've started. I think it was 2-3 years ago with 10, but now there's like 100 mentors in which they'll take in the youth, the high schoolers that are going to college, and they'll pair them up with mentors, and they have special scholarships. I'm amazed with such a low budget how much they are doing. I mean, it shows that their intent, Rio's.
I know that they have several teachers of English as a second language.
Yes, they do.
Which is very good because that's certainly a basic opportunity for people as they make their adjustment to living and working, especially with
so
families.
Besides the foreign students, the ones that are foreign born and they come and study here as a foreign student, there's plenty of them that, for example, they have a law degree in their own country. But it's invalid here. They can't practice, and so they have to find another profession. And depending on their source country, validating that credential may be a problem. So some of them just choose to start over. So they have to take their GED. For that, they have to learn their English and then start over with classes. And so it's you can't tell who's an immigrant by looking at them, and you can't tell really their whole background, any of their background.
Yes.
You know, they could be refugee camp source, or they could be doctors, and we don't know.
So the schools have to rise to the occasion of dealing with quite a few people from quite a few different backgrounds.
Yeah.
And also, what are the other parts of the community that have to rise to those occasions?
Well, you know, we have all kinds. In a sense, immigrants take care of themselves in that usually there's no safety net for them. That is, if there weren't health, there's still remedies.
Mm-hmm.
I've known people who have when they're sick, they get their medicines by calling their doctor back home, and then the medicines get shipped. So they take care of themselves because there is no choice.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the first line of defense. But as people settle here and they realize that there are many other needs, you know, you have to deal with insurances, you have to deal with law requirements, and so there's lots of things to be met. So for those that want to go to the university, you know, there's the problem of language credentials and getting in, paying for it. You know, we all have FAFSAs. Actually, most everything requires a Social Security number.
Yes.
Depending on your status, you either have or don't have a Social Security number.
How difficult is it for an immigrant to get a Social Security number?
Well, when there are only certain visa categories that will allow them to have a Social Security number. So if you come with a J1 as an invited from the university, you could get one. That means with a Social Security number, then you can, and a stamp on your passport, you can go and get a driver's license.
Yes.
So that works out very nicely. We have a system for that. But many other here that are temporary or visa, or there's different ways. And then you have the undocumented, those that either walked across or came on a boat or actually came on a visa and then their visa was 6 months and they stayed here the 7th month.
Mm-hmm.
So you have all kinds of situations in which the Social Security number may or may not be accessed. But in the end, for all those that don't have it or have one that's expired or their card says not to be used for work purposes, it creates a huge, then the other side of immigration, which is you have to take what you can get, mm-hmm. and then you have to make do with what that gives you.
And a driver's license is so basic to many aspects of life, certainly driving to work.
You can't get anywhere.
Yes.
We have an excellent busing system in the area, but by its natural limitations, the hours and whatever else. And so if you have a janitor job in the middle of the night, you know,
yeah.
I've driven people from, you know, Vine Street to actually the health center in Champaign because he had an appointment at 8 and there were no buses that could connect to get him to, you know, to his appointment at 8. So,
is there a program to help immigrants get driver's licenses?
Well, so this year we've had quite a change in Illinois because of that. About a year ago, in fact, it was January of last year when the first meetings were held to do the push for driver's licenses for all people that can drive.
Yes.
And so the campaign went all the way through, and by November it looked like it might come for a vote, and it voted in December. So the state legislature in eventually in January, and then signed by the governor, I guess it was February, early February or late January, he signed the legislation. So now all people that can demonstrate that they can drive can get a driver's license, which is so silly to say it like that,
yes.
but it is. So now a Social Security, not having a Social Security number is not a block to being able to prove that you can drive. And so starting in November, I think it's November 15th of this year, the new driver license law will come into effect, and so people will go, immigrants, it's interesting, I've learned through this process. In Illinois, the materials for taking a test can be done in English, Spanish, and Polish.
Yes, I've seen at the driver's license office, I've asked them to show me the different languages that they have.
Yeah. And so those 3 languages will have the privilege of at least a written test to be done in their language. The manual, what's it called? The practical test
yes.
will still be done only in English. And they have a list of, these are the English phrases that you must be able to both process and then be able to carry out. But of course, there's no accommodation for languages and safety rules, and so you have to be able to know how to drive. But that's exciting because that happened this year, and it really opens up the possibility for people, as simple as getting pulled over.
Yes.
If you're going to work and you get pulled over, you don't have a license, you most likely therefore don't have insurance, because if you don't have a license, you can't get insurance because they won't insure you. And therefore then, I learned in Urbana, you get pulled the first time, you would get your tickets.
Mm-hmm.
And the second time though, well, the first time you don't have a ticket, you'll get a ticket, but the DMV doesn't have a record of you, right? Because you don't have a driver's license. So you get your tickets and they assign you a number because you didn't have one before. And so now you have a record without a license. And then the next time you get pulled over, there is a record, but now they see that you've driven before. So the next time, I think it's the second time or the third time, then it becomes a third-class felony, I think is what they call it. Mm. So the first time you may not go to jail. The second time or third time you can go to jail for having had the same situation before. So now with the license, that gets to be dispelled or channeled properly, I think.
And time in jail means time not on the job and earning money for your family.
That's right. And up until actually a little over a year ago, just over a year, for those people that were here undocumented, for all those immigrants that had the necessity of coming here without papers, I would say, going to jail meant being transferred to immigration and being deported.
I see.
So there's this program called, federal program called Secure Communities that signs up counties to say, when you process somebody in jail, send us their information, and if they show up in our databases, we'll come take them away. So it was a real problem because we had people being pulled over for, whether it was a stop sign or whether it was, just like speeding or whatever else, for a broken taillight. Or I got pulled over once for one of my headlights wasn't on. They had gone bad. Then you get processed and you go to jail, and then they got deported. And it was a very huge, just debilitating to be working so hard to make things better and then to have somebody taken away like that. Anyway, Sheriff Walsh and his office worked it out so that they read the legal documents and said, actually, they don't have to be deported. ICE requests that we hold them, but it's a request, it's not an obligation. So they said, unless there is a reason to hold a person, criminal or whatever else, we don't have to hold them. So after whatever the local circumstance is, the law requirements to hold a person, they will not hold them for immigration officials anymore, unless there's a warrant out for them. So I have to applaud the local offices for being so reasonable and working through it and saying, we'll do what is better for the safety rather than for anything else. So.
It's good that they can rise to the occasion of doing that, because the problem is not going to go away.
No.
This is an attractive community, the university, other kinds of jobs, and that sort of thing. So it's a destination that a lot of immigrants want to come to.
Yeah.
And so the cities have to, the various the services of the city and the education and so on, need to learn how best to deal with it.
Yeah. So as we all learn, because in every context there is some learning to be done about how the immigrant communities function. And I say in the plural communities because we have many of them.
Yes.
And even amongst themselves there are sub-communities. And then little islands of families that don't have connection to the communities. But the part that needed to exist locally that somehow, in the service provision wasn't being taken care of was the advocacy part. Whether it's for driver's licenses or for the arrests, immigrant advocacy wasn't systematically being done, and that's where about 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, we started getting together many interested parties, and that's what led to then to organizing ourselves into what we now call the Immigration Forum, the CU Immigration Forum. And the group has consciously decided to concentrate on the advocacy part. As we learn and as we do service, we ultimately are looking for the advocacy of the contributions of immigrants, because there's so many.
Oh, yes.
And then the needs that aren't being taken care of, or that the system is just not doing in a reasonable way.
As you have become aware of various aspects of this, say something about the contribution that the faith communities make to this. Churches and mosques and so
I have to tell you that's where a lot of places, even through the refugee center, that's how many people were settled. So in the faith communities, you have both the willingness and then the human connection as to having somebody be learning the American way.
Yeah.
You know, and as somebody mentioned this week, an immigrant often arrives with a refugee with nothing. Maybe a bag.
Yes.
But that's it.
Yeah.
And so if you think of arriving as an adult to Urbana with that setup, and then you don't have the language. Refugees actually, you know, they have processed the whole thing. They might have a work permit, but they even have to pay off the plane ticket that got them here, but they don't have a job. So there's all of that. Chris from Union Place, I think, was the one relating that story. But from the Immigration Forum started then the outreach to faith communities, and over time, actually very quickly, the Allies of Faith was formed. And the group called now Allies of Faith is, we have like 15 congregations now meeting monthly, or members of leadership of those congregations, and we go over both needs and then how to help. You know, you have Stone Creek that has a large Congolese population. There's another church that also have Congolese population. We have Spanish speakers in many, including 2 congregations of Spanish evangelicals. But St. Mary's also has Mass, St. John's has Mass in Spanish, or used to. And then we have Hanjobal at St. Mary's. And then, you know, in our congregation, we have Thai speakers and we have Chinese. It just depends. But the Allies of Faith, besides taking care of that within their congregations, has also designated October to be Immigration Celebration Month, Immigration Justice Month. And so last year was held, lots of movies, lots of pastors directing their the word just escaped me. In
Their congregation?
Their congregations, and they give not a speech, the word just escaped me.
Okay.
So motivating their congregations to help and to do their best is to take care of the stranger, as usually their scriptures say.
You know, every religion in some form has something about welcoming the stranger.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you know, the Mennonites have done and do quite a bit worldwide, but not only locally. I have had excellent experiences with the Quakers, the Quaker Central Committee in Philadelphia. Wow. My respects to their just forward stance on so many issues, but locally too. And so you have, I hate to not mention one of them, but we have McKinley, we have Presbyterians, we have Methodists, you know, the food pantry also helps.
Yes.
So Mormons, I don't remember how many others, but we have many congregations helping that. Immigration Month coming up this year, the buildup is already for it, and so put in a plug for that. You'll be seeing that more at the farmers market, the table, and different congregations and different groups putting themselves out there to show what they do with immigrants. And then for Immigration Month, the proceeds of the fundraiser that month will go towards the DREAM Act scholarship for
is that right?
Parkland
Oh,
and for
okay.
university kids. Yeah.
What do the libraries do? We have excellent libraries
We
here
do
in
have
Champaign-Urbana.
yeah.
What do they have that is
You know,
resources?
I'm not as acquainted except for what I benefit from directly, and that is great foreign language sections of movies and media, but also books. And what I like about both of them is that they've got lots of books for children too, both for learning, in my case, Spanish. I just picked up my first Russian book at the Champaign Library, lots of vocabulary. And lots of pictures. So they provide that. The other thing I think that they provide, and this is little known, is that their facilities are also rentable, you know, or for free for the community members. And
Yes.
immigrants being community members, just Wednesday night, we had a nice forum at the Champaign Library that had to do with immigration reform and how to do it, and lots of people came of different backgrounds. And then next Monday, there's a group there that meets El Foro. It's a Spanish-speaking organizing group for immigrants, meets at the libraries. It's really easy to call on the libraries. For Immigration Month, actually, we hope to ask them to see if they'll put displays up relating to the theme, and we need to approach them on that.
When I looked into the libraries about this issue about a year ago, and Champaign didn't have much at that time. I think they're getting more. Urbana had quite a few resources already.
Yeah.
But the libraries are important segments of the community that can render services of a variety of kinds.
I actually became acquainted in Urbana early on. We had just arrived about 5 years ago with their story time in Spanish that Alejandra from Clocks runs from university, but they have made sure that it happens every month, and they supply. I happened to be out there on Saturday with my little boy as they read a book in Spanish and in English all the way through, and you know there were lots of kids in there and their parents. So
we've pretty much used up our time, but I would like to ask if there is some particular kind of concluding statements that you would like to. How can the ordinary citizen be most helpful?
Yeah. You know, the first one is in the judging. It's not us versus them. It's people, and we all have. There was in cultural, Seeley is an author that I used to read a lot, and Nordstrand is another one. But I learned the phrase there that has stayed with me, and that is that everything that people do meets a physical or a psychological need. And therefore, when I want to judge a person to what they're doing, you know, why is it that they, you know, I don't know, bribes in Mexico? There is a function for the bribing system across the world, including in the U.S. And it might vary, and it might not be of my taste, but it is fulfilling some kind of something. And that means eating crickets in some parts of the world. It's fulfilling protein for people, whatever. Or for us eating summer sausage, which other people would not touch because it includes so many things that, you know, for them they shouldn't be eaten. So it's easy to judge from our growth, from our base, but it's also as easy to judge from another base to us. So I'll just say is, let's just get to know each other and see how we fulfill our needs, and we'll find lots in common.
And all of us need to remember that our parents or grandparents, somewhere along the line, were immigrants to this country. Even the Native Americans had immigrated from somewhere else years and years ago. And so it's a long, complicated, multifaceted history.
I would say it's a human cycle. Immigration is. And as we get to see way back, we see how much it fits here. So I want to put in a plug. Next week there will be a group of Russians visiting us, and they're coming to learn how it is that we receive, integrate, detain, deport immigrants. And so I'll be showing them around And I think we'll have probably another time to speak more detailed and bring them in.
Very good.
But at least I'm calling on all services to receive them, and any Russian speakers to call me, because it'll be very nice to introduce them. Well,
that sounds like an excellent thing to do, because more and more people need to learn how to live together. We have it's a multifaceted society, and we need to learn how best to live with that.
Very much.
Ricardo, it's been very good to have you here this
Thank
morning.
you.
So thank you for coming and
Thank
sharing.
you. A pleasure being here.
All right, good.
Thanks.